penitential practices. We usually don't really like the sound of that. And why not? Because it sounds masochistic. We're like, what? Who wants to go and just do a whole bunch of things to deny yourself, offer more sacrifice? Nobody does that. Actually, we're not going to touch that point today, but if we were to talk about it, Jesus Christ didn't even do that. Kelly, but he died on the cross. Yeah, but he didn't die on the cross for the sake of dying on a cross. He died on a cross for a whole other reason. So what does penitential practices actually mean? If we are living Lent, which is a time of penitential practice, then there probably is something that we're not getting a grip on because it's something that we don't generally really like to hear. If we go to the Catechism, number 1434, it explains what does it mean to do penitential practices. And it explains it a little bit more in function of what it's for. So it says that penitential practices are for conversion in our relationship with God, with others, and with ourselves. And then it goes on to explain different ways that we can live penitential practices. A spiritual retreat, doing good works for others, etc., etc. So if we go back then to what does penitential practice mean? It means different acts that we can do that lead to that conversion in God, in our relationship with others and with ourselves. So what does that actually mean then? Let's go to just a basic everyday example. For those of you who cook, or for those of you like me who live in other countries outside of your native country. I grew up with degrees being read in Fahrenheit. And since I've lived in Latin American countries, everything is in Celsius. So sometimes to understand what 20 degrees Celsius is, I go and I convert, keyword convert, I convert 20 degrees Celsius to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And then I'm like, oh, okay, now I know more or less how to dress for the day. Or we can put the example also of a bonfire. When you put paper in there, or when you have wood, obviously, in your bonfire, those things that you put into the fire, once they're consumed by the fire, they're converted into smoke, ashes, etc. So there's a conversion going on here. There is something, especially in the example of the degrees of heat, it's exactly the same. The heat hasn't changed, but I'm converting from one thing to the next. So what does that mean for my life as a Christian? In my life, that means that when I let his life itself enter into mine, kind of like the fire that consumes the wood, I'm letting God convert my life into the fullness of what it's meant to be. What? But that doesn't even make sense. It actually does. When I let God take who I am and enter in, he leads me to the fullness of who I am. How does that work? A lot of us think that fulfilling our lives is having a better job, having a better position, getting 1,000 or 100,000 or 1,000,000 subscribers on YouTube. There's different ways that we measure what we think success is or plenitude in our life is. But those things, if I'm not a good person, what does it add to my life other than maybe making more money or feeling like I've got the approval of a lot of people? It doesn't actually make me a better person. And there can be a person who's poor, living on the street, has nothing nor has done anything in his life of any type of importance. And yet that person might live in an absolute fulfillment of who he is. So how does that work that God brings us to our greatest fulfillment? That means that when we let God live in us, he leads us to live greater surrender. We're able to develop to our full capacity all of our affective life, our emotions, sentiments, so that we can actually use them towards a greater good. It even helps for the development of all of our intellectual capacities because we get to a point where we can develop them, but we always get to a limit. And God can always take us the next step beyond that limit. So it's not that he cuts out our own capacities, but he takes us always to the fullness of and beyond. That's what it means to let God come into our lives. When we listen to the gospel, when we, through prayer, are letting God enter more and more into our lives, we're letting him take all that we are, all of our potential, and bring it to its fullness. So it's giving that extra little help instead of only relying on ourselves. That's what conversion is about. Conversion isn't just saying, now I'm going to just stop doing this and I'm going to start doing something else. Because in and of itself, to do those type of sacrificial acts have absolutely no value. But when I do them united to God, they receive a huge impulse that can be good for the salvation of other people through my prayer, through my sacrifice, or they can also bring my own person to its full realization.